Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Do Better podcast. This is Dr. Megan Miller, and we have two very special guests on our show today. We have Camille and Melody, who are going to be talking with us about different experiences in the field, and I'm here to listen and learn. Welcome, Camille and Melody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Do you all want to start off with talking a little bit about yourselves? And I'm just mostly going to listen unless you want me to chime in on anything.
Sure, I'll introduce myself. So I'm Melody. I'm a Black and also Haitian American woman. So my dad and my dad's side of the family are from Haiti. My mom is from the States, Louisiana specifically. I've been at BCBA since 2015, and I've been working in the field for 11 years now total. And yes, I also live in the UAE. I've traveled to several different countries. So I think that will be, I'm looking forward to sharing that part of my perspective too.
I am Camille. I am a Black African American, cisgender, lesbian behavior analyst. So a lot of my perspective will probably be more about just like the intersectionality of all of those identities and how they kind of show up in my work. I have been a behavior analyst only since last year. I'm like a baby analyst, but I've been in the field since 2013. And yeah, I just look forward to just kind of talking about just our different perspectives of what it's like to be a Black behavior analyst, a Black female behavior analyst as well. Melody, do you have any like unique experiences being like where you are versus when you were here in the congruent United States?
Yes, in terms of, well, I think anti-Blackness, first of all, is a global issue. It's not just something that's unique to the United States. And it's not something that I just became aware of when I moved to the UAE. I will say that my experience living in the UAE has not, I don't fear for my safety here. I don't fear for my safety as a Black woman, which I'm thankful to be in that situation. But in my travels and in the different countries that I've been to, and even living abroad, the theme of white supremacy and white supremacist values are still pervasive here, pervasive globally. I can't think of a single country that I've visited where lighter skinned people are not seen as better. Typically the people with lower paying jobs tend to be darker. And that's just a theme. It's true even in Black countries as well, which we can talk about, like why that happens. But yeah, that's my global perspective, at least. And then I have other perspectives that I can share just growing up and what my experience has been just throughout my life too.
I feel like here in Hawaii, although it obviously is one of the 50 states, I share that same experience as you, of like not being very fearful like of my life here. I literally, like if I see like a police car or anything like that, I don't feel scared the same way or anxious like the same way that I would back on the mainland. And it's actually really cool because working here, I have noticed so many similarities between like Black culture and Hawaiian culture that it's almost this sense of like feeling just so at peace here that I I mean, we're military, so we're gonna have to move, in a few years. But it's almost like I really don't want to leave. Like it's such a, and not to say that I'm so naive or blind to think that like anti-blackness or racism or white supremacy or that culture like doesn't happen here, but it really is not so overt where I am literally like it feels heavy to show up like in my blackness every single day the way that it did on the mainland. And I'm so sad about having to eventually have to leave and to give that up. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was gonna say like even I think among marginalized people and people of color, even being a Black person in a community of um, predominantly another marginalized group, um, a lot of the times because of the shared experience and a lot of times overlapping culture, you do feel more comfortable. um, I went to my high school where I graduated high school was 85% Hispanic. And of course, there are a couple moments where I wasn't 100% myself, but there were a lot of moments where there was so much overlap in my experiences and the experience of the Hispanic students that I went to school with too.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so interesting too about being here is that like I have found that pairing, I mean, we all know that like pairing is everything, right? But like pairing and having like my identity as a Black woman, trying and like really being intentional on also learning like more about like the Hawaiian culture before I just go in with like only my BCBA hat on has been like essential for, I believe, like the success that I've had in pairing with my clients, pairing with their parents, especially with the teachers, because a lot of the teachers that I work with are from here, and they do have this very kind of scared and fearful perception of like outsiders and outsiders coming in, and rightfully so. Like I'm literally on Oahu where they have definitely been oppressed and pushed out of their own community, and so having really even like the wherewithal to even think like, let me do some kind of research on Hawaiian culture before I start working with these people. Like they're so appreciative of that, and it kind of makes me sad because it's like that shouldn't be revolutionary. Like we should all think to at the very least like Google, something about whatever culture or race or religion or whatever it is, like, or whoever it is that we're working with before working with them. And it almost makes me sad how like appreciative they are for me doing that. But then when I think about like my Blackness, and I think about again like we work in a field that until 2 weeks ago did not, as a collective think to do the same thing for us both as the practitioners, both as the clients. It makes sense. It's sad. It's very sad.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm thinking about right now, at least while it's fresh in my mind, is just my learning history and the things that I've experienced. We hear things like representation matters, and I don't know if people understand why it matters. So and before I say anything, I also feel like it's really important to note that this is my experience. I don't speak for my entire race. We have a lot of, neither one of us speaks for our entire race. So we have a lot of overlap, a lot of like a collective shared experience, but at the end of the day we're still each individuals. And my experience in my childhood and how white supremacy has showed up in my life can be similar sometimes, but it can be also very, very different from another Black person. So white people need to always remember that. And I think right now in the age of not even age, but the past couple of weeks of like this newly increased motivation to, you know, find out what I can do, and let me go learn from all of these people and read books, and like, which is great because the education is important, but keeping in mind that you're not going to have all the answers after talking to 5 people or 10 people. And one of the main reasons you're not going to have the answers is because, you know, especially if you're new to the work, it's going to take time. And then 2, everyone's experience is unique, is different. There's always something to learn with every person that you talk to. So yeah, so all of that being said, going back to representation, I grew up, you know, I spent time living with my dad, who's Haitian. I spent a couple years of my life living with my mom. My parents were not together. And growing up, just to a glimpse into my childhood, I played with white Barbie dolls. I had all of the Disney VHS, all of them, Cinderella. You know, I would probably could make a fortune off of it now if I still had those original box tapes. But I had all of those. I listened to a variety of music, among that being popular pop white artists. So early in my life, you know, what was associated with beautiful and smart and pretty and talented were white people. All the time, every day. And it's like, it's just the norm, it's the standard. And when you have, you know, even from an RFT perspective, all of these pairings over and over and over, it creates the pairing of beautiful, smart, talented equals white. And there's this constant desire to be more white. So I'll let Camille chime in on that if you want to share your
Yeah.
journey.
So interestingly enough, so I grew up in a household that was very like pro-Black. My dad was born in 1955. He went through a lot of very severe, and I mean very severe, instances of racism. I mean, constantly. My grandmother, not my great grandmother or great great grandmother, my grandmother saw her brother be lynched. So like racism, and knowing about my heritage and my culture, it was so, and being proud of it, like being actively taught to be proud of it, was so deeply enriched in my household. We had like all Black providers growing up. Like it was just very, very intentional. But I somehow still internalized some of the messages that you were speaking about. So my parents were the ones that were like, no, you're not getting a white doll, you're getting a Black doll. But because I watched like Barney and Sesame Street and things like that, that I somehow still yearned for what I thought was like right, which was whiteness. And so I wanted to be like the Mariah Carey. I wanted to be like the Christina Aguilera without, and now that I'm an adult trying to conceptualize that, knowing how intentional my parents were on trying to like pair Blackness with so much greatness, I'm still honestly so confused on well, not really, but I'm somewhat, I should say, confused on like how that happened. But yeah, I grew up in like the suburbs of Detroit and Metro Detroit, and so it was very diverse. I mean, I grew up with, I mean, truly like some of everybody, like not just Black and white. I mean, like really, like some of everybody. But I just remember feeling so conflicted in like my Blackness, and it took me a very long time to really like that about myself and really appreciate that about myself. And I think for me, kind of going back to like your point, like that is why representation matters so much to me. Like it is important that my Black clients see that they can be, not to say that I'm like a role model, but I just literally mean like, I want them to see like, oh, I can be a Black behavior analyst. I want them to see that they can be anything. I am so intentional with my godchildren, my niece and my nephew. I mean, literally, I have mantras that I teach them and I make them repeat, because if they don't see that, I mean, it can really create some very, very heavy, I think, trauma.
Yeah. And I feel like, at least, because I have a lot of younger nieces, nephews, and small cousins in my family too. And when I see what they're playing with and what they're reading, there's all of these amazing, Black dolls. There's, these things, when I was a child, were not nearly as available. Like, you would go to the store and there were just like white dolls to choose from, and your parents buy them for you because it's Christmas. Like, they want you to be happy, but it's still sending that message. And it's not that it's our parents' fault. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But now, I think it's amazing that, like, people have started to realize this. Um, I also teach yoga, and there's a big conversation happening around this in the yoga and wellness space, and the pairings that are happening, that, mental health and wellness and practicing yoga, despite the fact that it's not even European, first of all, is associated with skinny, white, blonde, eating a kale salad, and just smiling, and that's what it is. And in yoga now, it used to be like, when people were really first starting to have this conversation, you would type yoga into Google and you would just get a bunch of pictures of white women. And now if you type yoga, you'll get like a variety, because I think that now people are hyper aware to this. But it's the same thing with the dolls. Like, I didn't have, these like Black cartoon characters to watch, and these books. And so, like, what the kids in our communities are being exposed to now is so much better than what we had too.
And there's still so like far to go. I think right now there's actually a petition going around, because even like in Disney movies, you don't see two Black characters falling in love with each other. Or if you do, in like Princess and the Frog, it has to be a super, super light-skinned character with, a more darker skinned character. Band-Aids, like there was a company that came out a few years ago where they were like, yo, like there's not any skin tone or like flesh tone Band-Aids for people who are brown. And they made those. And it's like those little things. I say it all the time. Like, I remember having to tell, when I was at RBT, my supervisors, like when they're writing a task analysis for hairbrushing, like they literally tried to give a hairbrushing task analysis to a little Black boy that was the exact same as a white boy and a white girl. And I'm like, that literally is not how they brush their hair. We don't wash our hair every day. So like, why are you putting in like a hair washing protocol and having your RBT probe it every day? It's like little things like that. And it's like, I'm the RBT. Like, my supervisor should be the one, if anything, that in theory should be like more mindful, right? And should be showing me best practices. And I think that's another reason why these conversations, while I think are super, super late, are so important, because I don't think that collectively, as like a body of behavior analysts, because our field is predominantly white, although obviously the board does not, have us disclose what our races, which I think that's a whole other thing. Like there's no like extra thought into that. I had a client who, like her mom like really wanted her to be like to sit in church. And I had to like explain to my supervisor like the significance of like Black church and like why it was significant to have this child be able to engage in like seated behavior in like attending or whatever. And again, like there was just no, which I didn't mind doing it because I'm like, I'm going to advocate for this child, even if I'm just starting to, right? But like there was just no frame of reference. And I don't know, I just think that can get very, very dangerous. I think that can get, because at this point we're supposed to be doing like socially significant things, but we're not required to actually be culturally competent to ensure that we're actually putting out socially significant goals and programs. Right. And so is that something that like you experienced there as well?
I haven't had like I don't have a client that I can really that like an experience like that comes to my mind. But I have heard conversations around this type of stuff in the ABA community, or even just behavior analysts being so confident on a topic because of their background and because of and I think this is just a problem across our field anyway, of just this very, at least in my experience, and I think other people agree with me, but just like a very pretentious attitude in the field, which is so sad to me, because it's like, here we are, we're trying to save the world with ABA, we're trying to work, improve people's lives and all these things, and then we're coming in with this like know-it-all attitude, which has been like a turnoff to me since from the first time I encountered it in the field. And it's almost made me leave the field too, just because I was fine, me specifically. I think for all those people that have like worked in one company or like work with an amazing collaborative group of people where people share ideas and people are open to people's ideas, like that's wonderful, and I wish I had that. But my experience for a lot of my time in the field has been arguments over just like very trivial things, more of a debate about who can get the scientific credit and acknowledgement over a child's case. And these are just examples, but little things like that have been so problematic to me. And then when you throw in race and like the lack of cultural competency on top of that already exists, it's frustrating. It's frustrating and it's sad more than anything, especially when most of us, I think, go into the field because we love behavior analysis. We love the potential to make change, to really apply the science on like a massive, impactful scale. And then to see things like that happening all the time in this field makes me so upset. So yeah, those are just my thoughts on the field. And in regards to race, not being seen, not being respected, not being the person that's looked to, even if you're on the child's case. So I have had that experience among professionals. So I guess I haven't really had a specific client that I can think of, but among professionals for sure. I've done work and written plans, and have implemented things that have resulted in impactful change for some of my clients, and then have been given zero credit for the contribution that I've made, and having all of it being given to my white supervisors, specifically white male supervisors too. I've had that happen many times. And it's just the theme of like being a Black woman in general. You're not the go-to person. You're not the person that is going to know what you're talking about. Camille, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, you're literally like, I feel like we like worked at the same places. Yeah, legit. That, and it's kind of hard too, because it's almost like when you try to like call it out, like you're wrong. And then again, this whole narrative, like the angry Black woman, and you're like, yo, like I'm rightfully upset about something, you know what I mean? And somehow it is like my fault, because how dare I be upset about it? How dare I question this? Um, and I'm with you. It's very discouraging. I didn't like, where I thought I should say, I did not like the field. I mean, very early on, like very, very early on. And then I finally was able to realize like I had to discriminate really between like the whole field versus like whatever like my experiences were at that time. And I think deciding to go to school kind of helped me to stay motivated to like get to this point where like, because I felt like if I like made it to be like an analyst, like if I passed that exam and all that stuff, like I finally would have a little bit more weight to like stand on to actually like speak my mind. And I mean, because truly, like the same things that I've been saying over the past 2 weeks have been the same things I've been saying my whole life. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, but it's disheartening. It's very, very disheartening.
And then even when you go get those credentials and get the degree, people don't expect that you have it. So that's another thing. I've walked into
Yes.
many homes where people are asking like, where's the supervisor? Oh, are you the BCBA? And we're prepared for it. That's another thing. So that Camille and I were having this conversation too about just like the private events that we have before we even like enter these spaces. It's a given, it's expected. Like I'm already preparing for like, what are they going to think about who I am? What are they going to think about how my hair looks? Or what are they going to think about my knowledge and ability to speak on, about what I know and how I can help or what advice I can give. So
like the compliments about like how articulate we speak and you know how eloquent we are, and it's like, I mean, I'm literally on the clock. Like I'm not going to talk to you the exact same way I would if we were at a bar. Like of course I'm articulate. Like I'm a professional, and it's just all these like microaggressions after microaggressions after microaggressions, or it's a little bit more overt. And then again, if you bring that up, you have to worry about like, is my company going to back it up? Is my company going to actually reinforce the fact that I feel whatever kind of way about this? And you know, the reality is more likely than not, the company isn't, because the client, you know, is the one that's paying for the service. And I think that was hard when we were talking about our private events. I think if there was one thing out of all the things I hope that people will remember is like how exhausting it is to be Black and white America, because we literally have to think and prepare and think about everything, like literally everything. I have to think about the volume at which I talk or laugh. I have to think about my facial expressions. I have to think about what I wear. I have to think about what I don't wear. I have to think about my hair. I have to think about my nails. I have to think about, I mean, just about anything. And then I still have to show up and actually do my job. And it's like, it feels so heavy sometimes. And it's like that, it's almost like quicksand, where it's like the more you try to fight it though, the deeper you sink. And there really is no coming up though, because this is literally life, and it's always been our lives. And I think that's what's been so interesting about the last like 2 to 3 weeks in our field, because I'm so torn between, like I wrote a Facebook status about it where it's like, I don't know if I should be like praising a fish for swimming and like being so happy that people are finally like getting hip to this, or if I should be like, well, finally, like this is like the bare minimum that people like, you know, should be doing. And I don't know, like, do I reinforce these behaviors that I want to see, or do I just not say anything and pray to God I'm not extinguishing it? Because it's like, I don't want to have to like give a whole bunch of behavior specific social praise for people finally acknowledging my existence in a field that, like, from the very beginning, like, didn't really want us to be here. I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah. And one of the things that I read recently that I really agree with from Rachel Cargill is that so anti-racist work is not self-improvement work for white people. And I think that a lot of what we're seeing now is exactly that. And yeah, to a degree, you do need to improve on yourself. You always need to be improving yourself. But really, this is a collective human rights issue, basic human rights. And white supremacy is so like it's just been here, like from the beginning of time, not time, but for a very long time. And because it's here and it's so ingrained into everything and systems and the way we talk to each other and our interpersonal reactions, it's even in many cases at the forefront of what looks like work and what looks like anti-racism work, but is actually, you know, let me work on myself, let me center myself, let me make this about me. And you know, that's a whole different topic. But I was thinking about the microaggressions too. And this example just came to me just about like how early this starts too, because a lot of people, and that I'm thinking specifically about the people that are afraid to talk to their kids. But I'll never forget this. I was in the car with my dad who's Haitian. We were in a parking lot, and we were trying to exit the parking lot as this other white woman was trying to come in. So clearly somebody was wrong. And in that situation, it just so happened to be my dad. And I was in the car. I was like six or 7 years old, maybe. And the lady was just so upset at my dad for going the wrong way. And she just kept shouting, "This is America, this is America," just like over and over and over. And, you know, there's so many messages just in that one phrase, like, um, you know, you, you don't belong here. This isn't your country. You don't know how to drive, and that's probably the reason why um, you're making this wrong turn and all of this stuff. And my dad just kept saying, I know this is America, I know this is America. Till this day, we still talk about that incident because now we can laugh about it. But I was like 6, and I never forgot that incident for whatever reason. And it's just like, that's what I've been dealing with as a child, and seeing my parents get treated a certain way. And for white kids who are not having to have these conversations with their parents, but their Black peers in school are seeing these incidents and having these conversations with their parents all the time, it completely dismantles like this idea that you need to protect your kids early. If you want to add anything to that, Camille.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's almost kind of ironic in that, like, from the time that we're kids, we're literally getting coached and prepared to deal with this. And on the other hand, I think for white kids, it's like they're being coached on not seeing color, and they're being coached on not being what I think like we now consider like overtly racist. And it's so interesting. I talked about it on another podcast. I had an 8-year-old client call me the N-word. And before this, though, his parents Googled me because they claimed that he was racist, their 8-year-old, and that they didn't want him to have a Black therapist because he was racist. And I was just like, this is interesting, you know? But at the time, this was like during the time in the field where we were just therapists at first, and then like we had to be an RBT. So I was like the only RBT at the company, and due to their insurance, you know, I had to stay on the case. And that was interesting because I'm like, I don't know if my job is Black therapist for taking me off. But anyways, nonetheless, I had to stay in the case. And the client, just made very, very like overtly racist remarks all the time. And whenever we would bring it to the parents, they just acted so confused, like literally, like so confused. And what was interesting is I watched my supervisor kind of dance around it. Like we know 8-year-olds aren't, or we know people, period, aren't just like born racist. But I watched my supervisor, instead of what I felt like would have been like having my back and just calling a spade and actually addressing it, not with the kid because it's the kid, and we can obviously include inappropriate words or however it is that we want to objectively define it in like our actual plan, but actually talking to the parents about it, they just kind of danced around it while also like leaving me in this like line of fire, and so that was interesting. And then the more interesting part, though, to me at least, kind of going back to that whole like intersectionality, is that like these were the people that would be at like Pride, like celebrating like part of my identity, but somehow being clearly like overtly racist, and not only being overtly racist, but teaching their child to be. And I think for me, like that's one of the most interesting things about our field. Our field is so like pride, woo, like, but when it comes to like race or any other parts of culture, really, I don't really know why we aren't generalizing this. Like why can we be like so, I think, welcoming, because I think our field really is welcoming to really like the LGBTQIA like plus community, and I do benefit from that. Like that is a privilege that I think I have within this community, but not to my Blackness. And even so, though, now that I say that, now that I'm thinking about it out loud, like I don't know if whatever company it is that I work for, if like if I were to disclose that like my fiance is a woman, like I don't, and my client were to be like, I don't want a lesbian practitioner, I don't know if my job would be like, I mean, tough luck, like this is who you have. Like I don't know if my not, and I don't mean like my specific employer now, I just mean like period, like hypothetically speaking, as a field, I don't really know kind of what we do about that. And that's tough. Like it's very, very, it's almost hard like wearing all of these kind of hats, and having to learn from a very early age that like the world is inevitably going to treat you differently, and not in a good way, because you wear all of these hats.
And also, like it's one thing to like advocate to at least the company, to the client about your expertise and your knowledge and why you are in the position that you're in. But then also, if you're uncomfortable as a professional, as a Black professional, can you be removed from the case? Can can we prioritize, because that's going to affect your job too, like as well. But we live in such a capitalistic society, that I'm really questioning the amount of companies that would do something like that, and be willing to lose a client and money, to make you feel valued as an employee, which is equally as important.
I agree. Well, and I think too, to that point, it's been interesting seeing all of these companies either at a request or just either independently or due to like a social influence, I don't know, like coming out with all of these statements lately about like Black Lives Matter. They've been most of them I think have been very specific to name like a few key names right now of people who have unfortunately been murdered, due to the like white supremacist society that we live in. And it's been so interesting watching what I wonder, as far as like, their future frequency of any of their, responses or behaviors. I just kind of wonder what we as a field are going to do about like this whole like performance kind of allyship versus like actually advocating, like not only again for your clients, because we do have clients of all different everything, but also for, you know, your practitioners, because again, like we have practitioners of all different everything. And more, I guess, to that point, like what I'm interested to see what we as a field do, like just as like a governing body, like what are we gonna do to ensure that all of us are culturally competent, that all of us are being very responsible with all our various platforms. And I just hope that we don't continue to like punish the people who are trying to correct behaviors. But I think right now I feel just bewildered, if I have to be honest. And I feel like this whole podcast, like I've been like laughing and joking, and I think it's almost like a defense mechanism at this point, because we know how this is gonna, and I hate to say that, but it's like we know how this is gonna go. Like we know, yeah. And that's disheartening to me.
It's so true. Like just being fully transparent. Like we talked about private events earlier. I've already had a bunch of them doing this whole podcast. Like, let me make sure that I say this in this type of way, or, you know, social behaviors like laughing and smiling are more appealing to anybody. You know, make people more comfortable and all those types of things. And the reality is, you know, after 400 years of your ancestors being brutally enslaved, killed, raped, having their children taken away from them, having their land stolen, like we don't want to have these conversations because they're so uncomfortable, but we can kind of coddle and treat the discomfort of white people in this conversation in modern day with so much care, even among us, which is why I think that internalized oppression is so important to talk about, because this is just a form of that, having these thoughts and having to constantly shrink yourself down, is a form of internalized oppression, just like you know, European beauty standards and things like colorism. And we were talking about this too, like, you know, there's a lot of white people that will hear things like colorism and problems within the Black community or marginalized communities and say like, well, you guys have all these problems in your own community, you just need to figure them out, you need to figure that out too. But the reality is, like, a lot of the problems that exist within our community is a direct result of the bigger problem, which is white supremacy. And, you know, the fact that, like I was saying earlier, like from a, like just anti-Black ideology is global. I've seen it in India. India's a big one. Big in the Philippines, big in Haiti, where my dad is from, and all of the, you know, there's like a hierarchy. The more proximity you have to whiteness, the better you are, even within people of color communities. So yeah, I think the reason why it's important to say this is because like this is such a massive problem. Like, and so like all of the white people that really are like, what can I do? I really want to fix this. Like, and I understand that, but at the same time, the problem is so large, and I'm not saying that to say like we forget about it, definitely not, or make it seem like it's something that we shouldn't work towards or intimidate people by saying that, but it's also not a quick fix. You're not going to fix, especially in the US where it's so heavily systemic, you're not going to fix it in 2 weeks of talking to 10 Black people or reading all the books, or whatever knowledge that you've newly found. It's not going to be fixed, and not to be discouraged by that, but to remember that and constantly recommit to moving in the direction that you want to head towards, and bringing people with you along that journey too, I think.
I also think too, like, and this is coming from somebody who, like, I am so sensitive. Like, I'm not even kidding. If you look at me the wrong way, I'm like in the corner crying, like my feelings are hurt. But like really shaping this behavior, I think, of just like humility when you get feedback, and knowing how to toe that line without like white centering, because I think the reality is, like, whenever we're learning something new, like, we're all gonna mess up at some point, and that's okay. I think you have to, though, be like receptive and open to that feedback without victimizing yourself because you're getting the feedback. And I think we have to be careful not to police how people are giving the feedback as well. And I think we also just have to all kind of acknowledge some of the privileges that we may have, as it relates to feedback. I had a supervisor, a white supervisor, describe herself as brown to me, talking about where she gets her color from, and she's white. Like there is nothing like brown about her. But I remember feeling so angry, like literally enraged, that I couldn't say anything because she was my supervisor. And I knew that if I did, there was a chance that I would either lose my job, or I would at the very least just be uncomfortable at the job. And so instead, like she was saying, like I literally just shrank myself, and instead then like that supervisor, I mean, literally like just became an S Delta. Like I only interacted with this person if I had to. And I quickly, honestly, found another job. But even that, where it's just like, be mindful, I think, of some of, because I feel like, honestly, like we're in 2020. Like there are certain things that I feel like white people have heard enough that people of color don't like, that like at this point, it's like, do better. Like no pun intended. Like literally, like you cannot ever touch my hair. Like just don't even ask. Like you cannot ever talk to me about how tan you are and try to like relate that to my brown skin. Like literally, like just don't do that. Don't ever talk to me about Black on Black crime. Or if you do, I do believe at this point there should be a certain expected response. Like I can't cuss in front of my mom. Like, and if I do, even at 30, I expect a certain response because like she has set that precedent. Like I can't cuss in front of my boss, for example. You know what I mean? Like we learn how to discriminate between all these different things. And I don't know why like cultural humility is not one of them. And it just, and I think for me, like I'm at a point where it's like, I think we have all shown in various ways that like we have within our repertoire to like learn something that is different. Like literally look at how we usually apply the science of behavior analysis. Like we had to learn about this particular, or these particular like sets of like disorders or terminology or whatever. Like we had to learn that. And now we have created like all these different contingencies, and we either like discriminate between some of them, we generalize some of them. And it's like, for some reason, when it comes to like race and ethnicity and culture, I personally don't buy the excuse that like we just can't do it, with that. I don't know.
And I feel like, I think it's also because we've been taught to avoid the conversation. Absolutely. From day one. So even in elementary school, I remember getting told that I was playing the race card. Like that's actually a term that has been created. What does that even mean? Why are you playing the victim? Slavery is over, get over it. We have a Black president. Like, obviously we've moved on from all of this, and like it's just like this constant like messaging that it's like it's all done, it's over, it's all done, we're in a new era, and it's just false. And yeah, I feel like that, like, there's already the white supremacy, and then there's like, you know, here's the white supremacy, and also we don't talk about race, just so you know, like, um which is yeah, it's, I don't have much else for that one, but it's sad. And in ABA, like, um, and this is why I think it's so important, like, because at least, and I am thankful for my program too. Megan, you can probably attest to this as well, but at least, at least what I was taught in ABA, I learned not just a narrow perspective. And that has helped me to see behavior analysis in everything. It's not just autism, it's not just, you know, OBM, it's not just, you know, all of these different little, very narrow focused areas. It's everything. It's everything. It's your interpersonal interactions, it's your learning history, from the day you step into this world. And not everyone I have found has that view, that world view, at least. And so for me, I'm like sitting here in the field, like, how can this happen? Like, how is ABA, how are behavior analysts not saying anything about this? Like, how, and I mean, the learning, like, there's a learning history even within the field too, that also needs to be acknowledged, in addition to like the learning history of your experience out of the field. So that was just something that I think is important to say. None of these things occur in a vacuum. Um, Everything intersects, everything connects to each other.
That's a really good point too. And I wonder if that is maybe another way that as a field we can do better, as you know, with respect to like just cultural competency, and really just, I think, just the overarching issue of human rights. If having that in our curriculum was actually a part of our curriculum versus like just learning about autism. I know like my master's was in counseling and ABA. And so in my counseling classes, I did get, I think, more of like an all encompassing kind of view of just behavior and, you know, like now what I know now is like private events and things like that. But honestly, for like all of my ABA classes, it was just like rote, pretty strict autism. And I don't think that there were ever really even like too many like examples of how to apply the principles and the science to just everyday life, which was so heartbreaking to me because like that is literally all I do. Like I do work, you know, in the field of autism primarily, but like the way I fell in love with this science was being able to just try to apply it outside of that. So yeah, I wonder if that is a way to do that. Are you allowed? Are you allowed to say like where you went to school? Are you allowed to say that? Is she allowed to say that name?
I don't know.
We both went to the same school, so it's fine.
Yeah, I went to Florida State, but I will say another thing that I'm thinking of too is the broad perspective that I had was valuable. But one of the things that I also always say is, like, you know, now I think a lot of people are becoming more aware of ACT and how it applies to the field. And for a long time early in my career and in grad school, that was not emphasized at all, zero. And now, like, knowing what I know about ACT, it's completely changed the way that I approached everything. So even because I really don't even want to like hype up my experience, like I was really just using that as an example. to say how important it is to have that big, large scope. But I still learned very rigid punishers, reinforcers, like this is how you change a behavior, very just like, ignoring people's feelings. Like we don't talk about feelings, that's mentalistic. And like, how can we even have this conversation about racism if we're not even gonna talk about that? So, it is later that I started to really bring that in to my experience, very, very recent too, honestly. And even outside of the field, my experience in yoga and really like learning mental health is huge, especially for our community. When we talk about things like generational trauma and stuff like that, I did not get that from ABA whatsoever. And I don't even want to argue, because I really don't even like shrinking ABA to like, this is just ABA, like yoga is ABA too, like mental health is ABA too. Whatever I'm doing outside of the field is also behavior analysis too. So we've created this culture where ABA is just like this bubble, and that's part of the problem too.
Melody, can I ask you a question real quick? You don't have to answer it, but I've been trying to stay silent, but I am very curious to know, with when you're talking about the broad scope, you're talking more about like the different applications of our science, because when I was at Florida State, we didn't have like any training on cultural competency or like knowing your population in terms of like, there was a little bit for OBM, like learning the business and stuff, but there wasn't anything on like learning about, it was like the exact opposite, we're a science. We don't need to know those things.
Yeah. So it's like, and that part was helpful, I think, like, because you're learning the science, you're learning BF Skinner, you're learning, this is ABA, this is how it applies, but you're not taking into consideration these very, very important things, like, the context of the person that you're, going into somebody's home, and realizing the impact that might have, so there was a lot of just black and white, black and white, black and white. And I think that that's just like across the field, whether you're in working in counseling, or whether you're in specifically OBM, or whether you're in specifically autism, just like a black and white thing. So I'm thankful that I was able to have that large view, but even with that, very, very rigid, very, very rigid, which is just a downfall of the field. And I think one of the reasons why like there's this big pretentious attitude of just like, we're so scientific, and we love our data and our graphs and our jargon, and like that's why we, every conference, there was a while where like every single conference that I was going to, there was some talk or something about how we need to like expand our reach and we need to do all of this stuff. And it's like, if you're not talking about cultural competency and racism and like these major, major things, how can you even begin to have that conversation?
So I've been here in Hawaii for a little over a year. And again, I've been in the field since 2013. And the very first time I heard about ACT is when I moved here. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, like this is about feelings. Like, are we supposed to be like doing this? You know what I mean? And I just remember being like so like happy, but so confused, because like that just was not my like learning history at all in this field. And I always remembered feeling so like conflicted by that, where it's just like, I mean, I know that like we are like, our primary focus is like behaviors, but like feelings matter. Like, our feelings do contribute to our behaviors. and even now, like I've probably text Melody, I don't even know how many times, like asking her, like, what book should I read about this? Like, where should I start? Because I'm just like, I feel like I almost have to play like catch up, you know, like, and try to like learn all these. I mean, because I truly like did not know what it was at all. And now that I'm kind of on this like beginning kind of journey with ACT, it has been very interesting trying to figure out, like, especially like over the course of like the last couple of weeks, like really figuring out like what my values are and like why certain things have been like triggering me so much from like practitioners in our field. And then like figuring out like how do I operate within my value? How do I also figure out the function though of like the behavior that I want to engage in? And then also just trying to like figure out like different like antecedent and consequence strategies on like to really kind of find this balance of like not like policing myself, like saying how I feel and like advocating for like my community without like, again, like being that whole angry Black woman. Is that something that like you also kind of juggle as well, would you say?
Yeah, and at least I'm thinking too of like the at least learning about ACT. I did the same thing. Like even before ACT, like even before learning about what ACT was, just learning about like we're talking about people's thoughts and feelings. Oh my God, that is so mentalistic. Like we don't do that. Mentalistic. Like that was just like such a big word. Um, you know, circular reasoning and like all of these different just, and then it creates this like it's an ABA culture, I feel, to ignore people, ignore the kids you're working with, ignore your employee, you know, and yeah, I just think the other thing that it does is it makes you separate ABA from your real life, and it shouldn't be that way. Like and that's what we're taught to do as Black people, period. Like, you know, you go into work, you put all your problems aside, you know, you put on your work face, you know, spend the day trying to impress white people all day long, and then there's your ABA, your work is separate, but it's not separate at all. You know, we can talk about a child coming in, you know, from maybe being on vacation for a week, or maybe coming in sick and he's not you know, as responsive or as attentive, but we can't talk about our experience as individuals and the learning histories that we bring into work, and our private events and our thoughts, and how that affects our work, which directly impacts the child, the team that is on that child's case. So all of this stuff connects. It's all behavior analysis, and we don't talk about it. And that's just so problematic to me.
That's a really good point. I know last week, I think it was last week, like anybody that knows me, I'm pretty like bubbly and that's just like, I'm just very like outgoing. Like I have a very like extrovert for the most part kind of personality. And we had a team meeting last week, and I'm not kidding, I literally was like crying like right before the meeting. I barely slept, and I just felt so heavy. And so literally, I'm not kidding, like the whole time I was in the meeting, and I was just very like, I mean, literally just like monotone. Like I did not physically have the energy to even like pretend. And it was like the second that meeting was done, I was able to literally almost immediately just like continue to cry, because it just felt so heavy. And I think the heaviest part for me was how my seemingly the people in the meeting were they were seemingly like unaffected by the exact thing that just felt so heavy. And you know, some days after I was able, I, for whatever reason, I just felt comfortable like admitting to one of the people that were in the meeting, like I couldn't even pretend. Like I literally could not pretend And their response, luckily, like, they were really open to it, and we didn't have a long conversation about it, and I didn't expect us to. But it was so interesting. Like, I was so down, and to everyone else, again, it seemed, and I'm not going, I mean, for me to agree with you about, like, the performance that we oftentimes have to put on at work, I won't be so, like, arrogant and pompous to think that maybe that they were just completely unaffected. I don't know. I guess that's not for me to say, but it felt very, very heavy, very, very heavy. And for the people who know me, especially my white friends, that week, they just knew, like, let me at least, like, check in. Like, Cammy, are you okay? Do you need anything? Without doing too much. Just like, I'm so sorry, that whole thing. But I think that's one of the most interesting things about being a Black in America is that, I mean, life just continues to go, and the same heartbreaking oppression continues to happen, and you almost kind of build up this, like, immunity to it until it just finally gets so heavy that you just crack. But then you still have to get dressed and go to work, and you still have to engage in these acts. And again, kind of going back to that whole generalization thing, I think that's just so interesting about white women in particular. I remember when the Me Too movement first started to really kind of take off. And at first, I remember being so upset about it because a Black woman is the one who founded it. But of course, we didn't know that because of how, it works. But I just remember seeing that there had been kind of like this shift in a lot of the white women in particular in my life, that they felt, heavy. They felt that heaviness, because it's all over the internet. You're probably, thinking or rethinking about some of your past traumatic experiences. But again, like, there is no generalization from, like, of empathy, right? From being able to, like, recall in a time where social media finally picked up on your pain to still having to, like, act and perform at work. There is seemingly like no empathy from that to, like, what Black and brown people are going through every day in America. And that's hard. That is, I can't lie, that's very, very hard for me to kind of, what is the word, rebel with? I don't know if that's the right word. It's hard for me to deal with, I'll say.
And a lot of these, like, very progressive movements, the, like, feminism movement in particular, specifically excluded black women, like, actually did purposefully. And so, like, this is just part of learning history. And I think also, like, how we were talking about earlier with, you know, sometimes white people feeling like they, like, talk to a few Black people and now they just understand the entire Black experience. Or, like, another thing that Black people do is when they show up to work is this constant feeling like you are representing your entire race, which I've experienced a lot and has made me have major mental health struggles over, to the point where I've felt sick, felt like I didn't want to show up at work because it just puts so much pressure on you. Feeling like I can't think straight, I've got to, like, work so hard. And especially if you're the only Black person in the room, which is the case for a lot of us that are working professionals, and specifically those of us with specific, if you're working it, if you're a government official or something like that, the chances that you're the only Black person in the room are even higher. So it puts so much pressure on you, because knowing how white people are seeing you as the representative of all of us, it's never out of your mind. Like, for me, I've never let that thought out of my mind. If anytime I'm the only Black person in a room, that thought is always there. It never goes away. I don't forget about it. I'm constantly aware that I'm Black and that I can easily be looked at as representing all of my people, which is a lot. It's a lot. You know, you don't want to have a weak moment. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to make someone upset, like all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and this is kind of a, like I'm literally about to do the exact thing that we're saying not to do, but I would kind of like your insight, Megan, like if you could kind of speak to that, because I really don't think that it's like a conscious thing that white people do when they like see me or they see Melody or whoever, and they just assume that like whatever I say is like Bible for all Black people. But if you could speak to that, and this is again like super, I will preface this by saying it's super rude and kind of messed up that I'm asking you to do this because it's literally what we're saying not to do. But I do kind of want to know, like, could you speak to that at all?
So whether or not, like, if I heard you or Melody say something, I would just, oh, that's what all Black people think. That's it. For me personally, I don't, but I do, especially Melody. We've known each other for several years now, and I've spent some good time with her. So if there's people that I'm friends with, whether it's, you know, I have a few friends who are autistic, you know, so who live a different experience than me, I highly value, you know, listening to them and trying to learn from them and like what their lived experience is, because I won't ever know that. But I try my best not to think, okay, so that goes for everyone. And I think part of that is because I've had the opportunity to talk to so many different people, and not everyone says the same thing, so you get that multiple example. So that's helpful. Yeah. But I definitely, I mean, I don't know if I should bring this up or not, but we've all seen some of the videos. Some people are sharing like one specific Black person who agrees with them. So then they just like share that, you know, and it's like that person doesn't speak for everyone. And the same would go for any, you know, marginalized group that we're talking about. So I definitely think that that's a struggle, an issue that, that exists. And I honestly don't know how to change that, besides hopefully, it stinks that it took this long to get here, but with the last few weeks, so many more voices being elevated and amplified and people getting more exposure, because it's unfortunate that a lot of people, especially in the United States, don't even have a Black person that they could that they would feel comfortable talking to about these types of things too, I think. So for that opportunity now, with like, there's new Instagram pages that I'm following that I never knew existed and horrifically never thought to even look for, right? But I'm not really on Instagram too much either, so there's that. I don't follow a whole lot of people, but now I am. So hopefully with more opportunities in that way, that will change a little bit. But did that answer the question?
I mean, I'm obviously not white, so I don't know what's going on in the minds of white people when they do this, but I have had white people and even white people that I've considered friends, and maybe have a Black boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, or you know, a Black best friend or something, respond to my, like, if they're disagreeing with something that I'm saying, respond with, my boyfriend thinks this, or, you know, my whoever thinks this. And it's just like, you know, these are people that consider themselves, you know, liberal and progressive, and you know, I'm not the racist people. But when you make a statement like that, it is inherently racist, because it's a way of saying, I'm gonna disagree with your argument, and not only am I gonna disagree, I'm gonna prove to you that I'm right because I know a Black person that thinks this. Which goes back to what we were saying about, like, we're not monolithic, we have different experiences, and also like your proximity to a Black person does not qualify you as not racist either.
that's what's so interesting about being a part of the LGBTQIA community, because the racism in our community, you would think is just non-existent, because love is love and we were born this way, and equality. And no, it's something so insidious about racism that is quite literally just American. Like, and not to say that it's only here in America, but it is just literally like so deeply embedded in us that like it's just it's honestly it's insane. Like it's sad, and it's insane. I think like there's like that quote that I'm sure like we've all heard in our field, where it's like, if you meet like one person with autism, like you've met one person with autism. And I literally feel like I want to say that to humans, where it's like, if you meet one Black person, like you've met one Black person. And like that's it. Like I don't assume that like you and like any of my other white friends have anything in common. Like I don't, that would just be so silly. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's actually really, I hadn't even like thought about that part either. I think people especially with marginalized groups do that though, right? Like, even though I just said I don't, but I do think the tendency is there. It's like, well, let me go find that one person who meets this, profile, whether again it's race or even like LGBTQIA, like you just kind of, your brain automatically is like, well, let me go get their viewpoint on it. But again, to me, it doesn't represent everyone's, but I think there's a balance there too, because we'd be remiss if we didn't get the perspective of a variety of people when we're making decisions about something. But then to assume that they represent everyone is also not good either.
Yeah, I think
I had somebody, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say that I don't think that white people are aware of it when they do it. Like, I definitely think that's an implicit bias. And it's also like the history of white people being centered. So whenever like you interact with a Black person and they might disagree with you or oppose what you say, the need and the motivation to center yourself, I think, is what like brings in that behavior of let me pair myself with like this Black person and what they said to qualify my statements, which is racist. It is a racist thing to do, and I don't think that it's something that most white people are aware of. What were you gonna say?
Well, so two things. I recently had someone, I don't know the person, but they just messaged me on, I can't remember which platform it was on, but they were saying like that they liked the signs that I guess people have seen like from the protests and stuff, and they were just saying, they were asking me about like my experience as a Black woman in a BCBA, and I'm like, where do we just start, Anyways, and then they proceeded then to compare them being trans and me being Black. And they were asking me to tell them how I thought their experience would be as a future trans practitioner. And I'm just like these things don't, like, I was so, it was just very confusing, because I'm just like, why? And so then it's even more of like an overgeneralization, because it's like, why because I'm a minority, I somehow can then speak, like I'm a cisgender woman, like there's so many privileges that I have. It's almost like insulting that kind of like overgeneralization would even be made, so yeah, I was thinking about that, but there was something that you said. Oh, one of the things I think I've also realized about racism too is that I think from the time that we were kids, I think especially like with our generation, we're literally just taught like racism is like the KKK and like saying the N-word, and that was it. So it's almost like if you're not doing that, then you're good. like, and you're a good person. Yeah. And so I think right now, white people are kind of having this like new awakening that is like, no, like actually all of these behaviors, and here's my objective definitions of them, and here's some examples of them, and here's some non-examples of them. Like, these are also considered that. And I think what we're also kind of seeing, kind of like you were saying, going back to like that centering, is like this sense of like this sense of grief, which I think is expected, like this sense of grief where you're like, yo, like I may have really hurt a whole lot of people in my life, or I may be actively hurting or actively doing this. And that's not easy to sit with. I know for me, in my younger years, when I was learning about like the trans community, for example, there was a grieving period that I had because I really had to unlearn and unpack so many of the things that I was taught. And I had to reckon with the fact that I have probably hurt and been toxic to people in my life, with or without me knowing it, intentionally or not. And my intentions don't matter, right? It's like my impact over my intentions. I had to unlearn that, and I had to unpack that, and I had to vow to make a conscious effort every single day to be better. Again, no pun intended. And so I think for me, like that's one of the things that I've appreciated about like the people in my life who are on this journey of becoming and engaging in like anti-racist practices, that they seem to really understand, like it's really like a journey. Like we are literally on this journey of just being better human beings, and you don't have to play victim when somebody like calls you out on it. You know, like you don't have to do some performance of like, you know, wearing kente cloth or supporting Colin Kaepernick 5 years too late. Like you don't have to do those things. Like you can literally just be like, you can, even in your moment of like private reflection, you can just look at yourself in the mirror and literally just be like, yo, like I have some things I have to unlearn. And that's it. Like that's literally it. I think right now there's like so many groups on Facebook where white people are like, well, what do I do now? And it's like, just sit with that. Allow yourself to feel the grief, because I mean, think about like behavior change, like the things that we are doing just as analysts. Like it's not easy. Like we didn't learn this overnight. You know what I mean? And to really create like a long lasting behavior change, like you have to be intentional on that, and just be careful. I think like don't police the kind of criticism that you get though. Because again, like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I do not believe that the average experiences of racism that I have experienced in my life have been like so calculating, you know, and like so intentional. I don't, but that's what almost makes it even harder to change, right? And so it's like, it's okay. Like we're all on this journey. And it's hard. Like acknowledge that it's hard, and it's okay. And I like seriously, I literally recommend like Dr. Victoria Ferris. Like I'm obsessed with this woman's work with disrupting racism.
Great.
Yeah. I am obsessed with the fact that she's relentless, and I love that. And she understands that she has a privilege as a white woman where she could be relentless that I don't, because my relentlessness is me police. And my relentlessness can get me literally killed. My relentlessness can get me like fired or whatever, you know? And I don't know. I pray that like this podcast helps people to just want to continue to do the work. Like if there's any message that I think I could give, to just that, like, please don't stop doing the work just because it doesn't feel good. Because other things like yoga doesn't feel good. Well, to Melody it may. CrossFit, which I love, does not feel good. Like spin class does not feel good. Like hiking does not feel good, and we do it anyways.
Yeah, studying a list of ABA terms to prepare for your exam doesn't feel good to a lot of people, I'm sure. I fully agree with that too. Like that's my one actionable step. Be willing to be uncomfortable every time. every time you get a comment, every time you want to respond to somebody, every time that you have thoughts that show up, every time that a Black person maybe calls you out, be willing to be uncomfortable and then move forward.
Well, those both sound like great ways to kind of conclude, but I don't want to say, like, you're done. So you both kind of paused there.
No,
So
you're
you want to close out on those two final thoughts and actionable items? I can't think of a better way, but I also don't want to stop you.
No, I think I agree with you on that one.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, like that's, if you do that one step, that's the hardest part of the work. Like if you do that one step, you almost can't do anything wrong after that. Like you can't, because you have to do the internal work. You have to be willing to put yourself in new spaces, to try new things, and then I think everything will just fall into place.
Well, thank you both so much for spending time with us today. And I didn't know if either of you wanted to share anything in terms of, I know we don't want people to contact you to like be taught anything, but are there any, like Melody, you mentioned that you do yoga. Camille, I know not as much about you, but I'm hoping to continue to learn. Are there any like not resources, but any, things like websites or things like that you think you want to share with people before we end, to check out, or if they want to follow you and just see more about who they learned from today or anything? We didn't talk about doing this, so feel free to say no, but if there is, I'll put it in the show notes.
I personally don't have, I don't have a learning platform for this topic. I really focus my work, especially when it comes to wellness and mental health. I really focus my work on the liberation of my community and Black people, is most important to me. So I don't think that my platform would be a place for like white people to learn more, but there's plenty of people that are doing that, who I do follow and are amazing. So yeah, I think I've been seeing a bunch of stuff floating around on the internet. So probably the people that I would name, maybe most people have, I hope most people that have started this work maybe have heard about them. Camille, do you have any?
Yeah, I was gonna say same here. I mean, honestly, like I could give you my Instagram, but I'm really not that interesting. Really am not. And but I'm kind of like you though. Like for me, one of the things that I am pretty intentional about is again like Black liberation as well. So, I mean, I guess if you're a student, I do offer like remote supervision. You can go to readysweataba.com. But yeah, I mean, I'm super boring. Feel free to follow me, but you're not gonna see anything fun.
All right. And I know you mentioned Victoria Ferris, so I'll definitely include her information in the show notes. And I have a few resources that I've been gathering, so I'll include those as well. And I think that's probably it for today. So thank you both again for taking the time to talk and share your experiences. And I keep not wanting to say teach us, but you are teaching us. So thank you for that. We're very grateful.